Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar to review the results of our 20th annual Holiday Barometer. My name is Vladimir Polotaev. I'm Chief Marketing Officer for Generali Global Assistance, and I will be moderating today's webinar. We have a great list of attendees from all over the world, and our goal today is to offer you travel trends expected in this summer, both for the US and globally. We will highlight key characteristics and motivators of this summer traveler, as well as offer you a comparison to the pre-pandemic summer and how things may have changed. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a copy of the recording in a follow-up email. We should have enough time to also answer questions at the end of the webinar, so please feel free to submit those questions via chat. Today's webinar is presented by our key experts. Chris Carnicelli has been a strong voice and a leading travel insurance industry expert for several decades. He is currently a CEO of Generali Global Assistance and will share insights on the US travel trends. Francine Abgral is Europe Assistance Group Head of Global Travel Business Line. She has been instrumental in expanding the scope and depth of the travel insurance and assistance services we provide to our partners and their customers. She will share global insights that may help you prepare to ever-changing realities of the pandemic and digitally transformed world. Also joining us is Katya Skorik, Group Head of Strategy and Marketing for Global Travel Business Line at Europe Assistance. Katya and her team's work continues to ensure Europe Assistance leading position in the travel assistance and insurance industry, and they are responsible for bringing insightful research to help our partners understand and adjust to the new day realities. Katya, would you like to share more about the current survey and how it was conducted?
Absolutely. Thank you, Vladimir, and welcome to everyone. Hello. I am first going to talk about the survey methodology. We covered 14 countries across several continents. The survey was conducted online between May 10th and May 21st and using a representative sample. What's interesting is that a lot of countries still had lockdowns and restrictions during this time. So you could argue that if we repeated the survey now, the findings could be even more optimistic. So now that you know where we are in terms of methodology, I will turn it over to Francine and Chris.
So what you can see here is the not so surprising news is that in terms of travel this year, we are not yet at the levels we had in 2019. You can see in Europe, we are still 6% below 2019 level. However, the very good news is that numbers are up from last year. So as Katya mentioned, we see that people are much more optimistic about travel this summer. The one point I do want to highlight also here is about Thailand, and this echoes what Katya just said. You can see that the levels in Thailand are the same this year as they were last year. And the reason for this is very much the timing of the survey and the reality in Thailand. Thailand did not have the same first waves and second waves that were experienced in the US and in Europe, and only were very significantly hit by the pandemic locally in March, April, May of this year. And so the results you will see for Thailand throughout the survey are significantly impacted by this, and you will see that they are much more pessimistic than other regions in the world.
Thank you, Francine. So I guess I'm going to pick up, first of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I see we have people from all over the globe. Chris Carnicelli here from New York. So similar to the global trends, I'll pick up on the US trends. The good news, I think, which is similar to globally, is that the US is certainly up over last year in terms of returning to travel, 20% up compared to last year. Still not quite there yet, so we're still off our pre-COVID levels at 50% compared to 68%. But I think, as Katja mentioned, the survey was taken several months back, so I think sentiment probably has continued to improve since then. I think we can flip to the next slide, Vlad. So this is interesting. So even though the U.S. is still down in terms of people saying they plan to travel, the U.S. seems much more optimistic than the rest of the world that travel will return to normal in the short term. You know, I think that this probably is also reflective of the timing, right? Because I think that the vaccination levels were higher in the US than the rest of the globe at the time of the survey. So you'll see here that 15% of Americans think that travel will return this year, back to normal this year, which is more than double any other country that was surveyed. So there seemed to be a lot more optimism when the survey was taken in the US that things would get to back to normal in the near term.
Thank you, Chris. And in the rest of the world, you can see that we don't think that travel will be back to normal until 2023, but that by 2023, we do see that 2/3, more or less, of respondents do believe that we will be back to normal levels. You can see Thailand, which is the fifth one from the bottom, is the most pessimistic of the countries that were surveyed, with around 35% believing that travel will be back to normal conditions in 2024 or after 2024, and 6% think that it will never come back to normal conditions. But the good news is we're all excited that travel is restarting again. So let's look now at what some of the concerns are of people starting to travel again.
Okay, so I think this is US first, Francine, right? So you want me to take this one? So this is US first. So this shows the reasons Americans cited for not traveling in 2020 and 2021. So last year, in the height of the pandemic, not surprisingly, the #1 reason people cited for not traveling was the pandemic. And only 25% said it was economic reasons. Usually economic reasons are the #1 reason historically. This year, the #1 reason was back to economic reasons, can't afford it, as opposed to the pandemic. It shows that things are getting back to normal sentiments. That's still a very low number compared to historic numbers. And I think what's interesting here is I think the travel, we're still not completely out of the woods yet, although there is more optimism because you have over 50% of the people, if you add up the 26%, 12% and 11% there's still reasons related to the pandemic, whether it be mask restrictions or fear of quarantines. So more optimism, but starting to get back to normal, which I think is consistent with what we've seen on the prior trends.
So looking at the same questions for Europe, Thailand, and China, we can see that in 2020, the main fear was around the pandemic, and this has moved forward. So people are starting to find ways around the pandemic, and the #1 concern now in Europe is more about affording their holidays and about the sanitary restriction. But the pandemic becomes now the third reason that the third concern that people have. With the exception of Thailand, again, as you will see over and over, Thailand is still, the pandemic was still very much top of mind when the survey was done. So looking at the concerns that people have and the main COVID concerns, maybe Katja, you can share with us a little bit what people's thoughts are, the top concerns they have on COVID.
Yes, we absolutely believe that COVID remains a concern for people on their trends on the family and friends health. It's quite a challenge because you can see here that across all of the regions that we looked at, it is the #1 concern. It is not surprising, of course, because the pandemic has influenced all of the regions, and you can see here that Thailand is the only one, the exception, where the economic situation, has been more pronounced, than the family and friends health, or overall health.
Okay, thank you, Katya. So I think as Katya mentioned, so this slide kind of reiterates that COVID is still a concern of people regarding traveling when historically, as we mentioned, budget has been the #1 concern. What I found interesting here is that, for US, but I also see it for Europe also, and I know Francine will comment, even though the concerns are COVID related, you see that folks are slightly more concerned that they won't be able to perform their normal activities on vacation. They won't be able to go to restaurants. They won't be able to go to bars. Slightly more concerned about that than they are. They're still concerned about their health and about possibility of quarantine, but more concerned, at least here at the time of the survey, that their vacation will be disrupted or not the usual vacation because things are still closed. And I'm pretty sure if we did the survey today, as mentioned, that would be a little bit less because things are obviously opening up.
Thank you, Chris. And yes, it's interesting to see the concern about being able to do usual activities, and it leads people to travel a little bit differently. We have seen that people look to travel to tier 2 or tier 3 cities and destinations where there are fewer people, so that they can do new types of activities or so that they can be with less people. I think the other interesting concern that people have is around the quarantined. And being quarantined has been something that has happened throughout this pandemic and in very different ways. People were quarantined on arrival, quarantined on returning home. There were crews that were quarantined, hotels that were quarantined. And what we have seen is a very different set of measures across different governments, which means that people in measures that keep on changing. So people are worried that this could happen to them. But to try and improve, resume travel and improve the lives of travelers and holidaymakers, at least in Europe, there has been a few initiatives to help make it smoother. And a few months ago, the European Union launched a website called Reopen EU. And on this website, they share information about the different rules from going from one country to another. The other initiative that Europe has put forward to help improve travel is the digital COVID certificate. So as of July 1st, in Europe, residents and citizens of Europe are now able to travel with a digital certificate, either showing vaccination or negative PCR test or proof of having contracted COVID, which allows them to cross borders. Now, the rules still vary for where you can go and how to behave in certain public places, but at least the border crossing has been somewhat standardized in Europe. And for China and Thailand, we also see some of the similar concerns. As you can see, the epidemic outbreak is still very, very high as a concern in China and Thailand. In China, probably also because they suffered from it right at the beginning and had significant impact. And in Thailand, as mentioned before, because when the survey was done, they were in the midst of the pandemic.
I will talk about the travel sentiments. One of the most important things that we wanted to know is, how do people feel about travel? Overall, we feel that we got a very positive message from the consumers. You can see here that on average, we're at about 6.6 on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 meaning feeling very anxious, and 10 meaning very excited. Worldwide, I believe we see an eagerness and excitement to return to normal and to be able to travel again, even though the people are understandably feeling a bit anxious about the pandemic that's still with us.
Okay, so I'll start here, Katya. So we're starting to get into some granularity here about destination. So this one is interesting on the factors that people are thinking about in terms of choice of destination. So interesting to compare pre-COVID versus COVID. So the big shift here for the US, and I'll let Francine comment on the rest of the world, is number one, this is the first time safety has been ranked in the top 3 factors. So that's interesting. So you see that people are much more concerned about their safety, whether that be their health or their overall safety. So that, I think, is probably not so surprising. Also, the big jump was friends and family, showed a big 10-point jump from 24% to 34%. So clearly this indicates that people have felt isolated from friends and family, and their first priority, at least post-pandemic, is to get back out and reconnect with friends and family, and that's obviously going to be a trend, at least in the short term, as people select destinations.
And Chris, this is similar for Europe as well. So safety in the rest of the world. Safety was not in the top 3 factors in the rest of the world, and visiting friends and family has also risen in the ranks in Europe. In terms of the safety, I think what's also interesting to see is how travel companies, tour operators have responded to this. And there are many that have done a very, very good job putting forward some safety protocols. We have seen some tour operators doing on-site PCR tests in the middle of the stay. And actually, this has been very well received by the people who were on these tours. So I think safety is a top concern. I think our travel partners many of them adapted very well, but need to continue putting together these protocols and communicating to the travelers, because the travelers really care about this safety.
Okay, so this slide shows how people want to spend their time while on vacation. So similar to the prior slide, number 1 is to spend time with friends and family. This was actually also number 1 pre-COVID, but I think the big change here, at least for the US, is that pre-COVID in 2019, 44%, or a close second, said discover new cultures and change of scenery was a top travel motivator, where now that's down to number 3 at 29%, and up to number 2 is to relax and for peace of mind, moved up to number 2. So I think, as I mentioned, I think for Americans, it seems that more folks are looking to, at least in the short term, to relax and reconnect, and maybe prioritizing those maybe more relaxing and reconnection trips as opposed to the more adventurous international trips going to explore a different culture. The question will be whether this will be a trend that will continue or whether it will be something that, you know, just in the short term, people looking to reconnect and relax, prioritized over the longer type international cultural trips.
And in Europe, we see that what has changed from the past is that the top factor is now coming together as a family or with friends. This was already in the list, but was not number one. So this kind of tells us that people have not had the chance to be with their family so much, or feel the need to be more with family in those challenging times. And so this is also similar to the US results. People see this as the top motivators. What's also interesting that we wanted to highlight on the right of this page is a new trend called workations. So we have seen a lot of people starting to combine their holidays with working. So either extending their holidays by a few days and working from the place of holiday. And this has been possible because everyone has started working remotely and has started discovering that they can now do this. And also they needed to get away from home and disconnect from the home office, and so spent more time on the away place. And we have seen this trend also affecting the bookings on vacation rental. We have seen a lot of vacation rental bookings this year linked to people going away to work and or combine work with holidays.
So this slide is about mode of transportation for travel. So for the U.S. at the height of the pandemic in 2020, not surprisingly, 80% of Americans said they were traveling by car, with 20% saying they were taking planes. Obviously, there were much fewer flights last year. This year, car travel is down to 55%, and now almost double the number of people are now saying they're taking planes. And I'm sure that number is even higher if you were to survey it today, because we see from the TSA reports that airports in the US are getting very close to back to normal levels. I think what's interesting, though, is that the car is still very high compared to historical trends. So, you know, although we're starting to see it get back to normal, the question will be, are people going to look to be taking their car and drive to vacations more in the future? And we'll talk about that in future slides.
And in Europe, the number of people traveling by car is also very significant, very similar to numbers from last summer. And this is because people are taking their holidays either in their country or in neighboring country. We have seen that over 50% of French, Italian, and Spanish residents plan to spend their holiday in their own country. So people are traveling, but they're staying pretty much local and traveling by car so that they can, because they can, and also because this way they are avoiding any extra measures they would have to take because of the safety measures. What's interesting in China is that we see the number of plane travel has gone up significantly versus last summer. Last summer, plane travel in China was 29%. So this is getting us very hopeful that people are ready and wanting to start traveling, if we consider that China has somewhat gotten out of the pandemic a bit before the other countries. Thailand still very important in terms of car and rental car, so together very high, but still high on planes. Because in Thailand, easier to get out with the plane, and people who go on travel go further distances.
Okay, so I guess this continues the theme of, I think, car travel. This slide focuses on the reasoning behind the transportation choice. So for the US, for the first time, convenience is now the #1 motivator. And I think that helps explain that one of the reasons that drive to vacations and, taking your car seems to be very, very high and continues to be very, very popular. In the US, you see 63% are now saying convenience, and I think that's reflective of people. It's a lot easier, obviously, to go to your driveway or your parking spot to drive to a vacation than going to an airport and going through all the safety measures that are currently in place today. But we're seeing that trend change. But the question will be whether people will continue to take their car as a primary mode.
And Chris, one of the other questions we had here was whether people would choose their mode of transportation to avoid being infected. And that was one of the questions we asked. And actually, it did not come up so much that people chose their travel transportation mode to avoid infection. It does come up in Thailand, but in the US and Europe and China, it was not the primary motivator to choosing the transportation.
So now that we've talked about where people are going, how they're getting there, we also wanted to mention where they're going to stay. And interestingly, hotels have proved to be quite resilient in pandemic times. They remain the preferred type of accommodation for all consumers, and they were also ranked #1 in our 2020 study. But we're also seeing the rise of vacation rentals over the last several years as a trend. In Europe and China, this is now the second most preferred accommodation type. And I would say that this is very consistent with the findings around how people are traveling now, because there is a lot of focus on social distancing. There's also focus on local and closer in travel, which means that you are going by car, you're staying maybe within your country, or you're going to a neighboring country. And more naturally, you might be going to a vacation rental than only to a hotel. But that said, hotels are still the winners, even in the current pandemic.
Okay, so travel insurance, our business. So we know a few things about this. Likelihood to buy travel insurance. So, just for context, it's not surprising that the percentage for likelihood to buy travel insurance is lower in the US. For context, compared to Europe or Asia, the fact is that Europeans and Asians take more international trips than Americans who take more domestic trips. So therefore, I think a lot of Europeans and international travelers are looking for more medical-based coverage. Not that medical is not important for a U.S. traveler as well, but it's perceived to be more important when you're traveling on an international-based vacation. So whereas the U.S. policies are more cancellation-driven as opposed to medical, I would say. Now, with this being said, the number 35% is up, significantly up for the U.S. 25% last year, and is 35% is high historically. That's also consistent with what we're seeing in terms of the actual take up. This is asking your likelihood to buy, but we're seeing also the actual purchases are higher. We're seeing take up on travel insurance much higher than we've seen pre-COVID. We're seeing historically, depending on the distribution channel, take up of travel insurance is somewhere between 9 and 13-14%. We're now seeing take up rates 18-20%, even higher. So I think the appetite for travel insurance as a result of COVID is increasing, both in the likelihood to buy and then in actual purchasing.
Yes, as you can see, the pandemic has made people very much aware of the need and necessity of being covered and having travel insurance. There has been some changes also on how some countries have reacted to this. And Thailand, again, for example, is making travel insurance mandatory for any international visitor. It's mandatory to show that you have travel insurance covering you for if you become sick with COVID. So these are changes that are happening in the industry, and travelers are very aware that, very much more aware that they should be covered. So as you can see, maybe to wrap it up, you can see that COVID has certainly influenced the choice of people for their summer holidays and the way they travel. They're adapting, and they're adapting by taking much more local trips, by taking their cars, by going to safe place and choosing safer destinations and activities, and also by getting coverage. But the very good news, and what we're all excited about, is that people are traveling again and want to continue on traveling. So we're very excited about that.
Thank you, Francine. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Katya. We have right on the dot half an hour of the presentation, and we have some time to for Q&A. We have a couple of questions which were submitted prior and a couple of questions which have come up during the webinar. If attendees have more questions, please feel free to add them to the chat. The first question which came through was from Lillian. How have the events of the 16 months affected how travel professionals will sell global travel insurance? Chris, would you mind taking this one on?
Yeah, sure. You know, I think even prior to the pandemic, there started to become a trend where I would say that the travel insurance industry was starting to become a little bit more granular in terms of the sale of their products. What that means is travel insurance is not necessarily one size fits all. I think there may be different needs of different travelers. So I think people are starting to recognize that they may have different needs depending on their type of travel. So as we saw in the survey, you know, now there are many more drive-to vacations. There are many more vacation rentals. So I think it's going to accelerate the trend of being more, you know, we like to call it the right product at the right time at the right price, right? So, I mean, for example, a US traveler who is, and I'm making this up, you know, going from Washington, DC and traveling down to the Cape, down to North Carolina, doesn't need certain things, may not need certain things, may not need baggage, may not need, you know, as high a level of medical, et cetera, compared to a trip where you're going internationally. So I think it's going to require travel insurance professionals to do, and our partners to do, is to think about, you know, whether or not we need, you know, more granular products to fit the needs of a specific trip. Which means that the travel insurance is not a commodity, but, you know, should be tailored toward, or could be tailored toward the type of trip that an individual traveler is taking, that's more fitting of their needs. So I think it's going to probably accelerate that trend, would be my view. Vladimir, I don't know if that answers the question.
It definitely does, and I was wondering if, Francine, you have any input from the global perspective as well?
No, I think I completely concur with Chris, and there's other changes that we also need to adapt to. So to give you some examples, during the pandemic, a number of airlines have offered different types of refundable tickets, exchangeable tickets. So we need to adapt our product in a very dynamic way to complement the policies of the airlines or the tour operators. So I think the pandemic has made the travel companies force them to adapt their offering, and as a result, we also need to be very reactive and have offers that complement the offers of our partners and give peace of mind to the travelers. This is really what the travelers are looking for, is peace of mind, so that they can go on their holidays, their trip, and enjoy it and not have to worry.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The next question was from Renee. Can we share these research findings regarding market trends with our customers? Katja, you can free to comment, but I would say yes, the results have been published publicly on Europe Assistance and Generali Global Assistance websites. And if you need more information, your Europe Assistance or Generali Global Assistance contact person will be able to share with you full results of the survey for your reference. Correct, Katja?
Yep, absolutely. We actually have, a microsite, where you can access, the full report, findings, so we can certainly provide, the link, to that site.
And then going through the question which came through the chat. First question is from Megan. What coverage is provided if a person traveling and gets COVID? So that information also is available through our websites, and we have throughout the COVID situation, and currently we have been advising that we continue covering epidemic-related illnesses as a covered reason to cancel or interrupt the trip, along with reimbursement for emergency medical care, emergency medical transportation, change fees, and loyalty points redeposit fees. Chris, Francine, any comments? Or
I think that's right. That's right, Vladimir. I mean, COVID is a sickness that's a common, at least is a sickness which is covered under the policy, and COVID is most certainly a sickness. So it's most certainly is a covered peril under our policies.
Thank you. And then the other question also from Megan through the chat was, do you give any proof other than the policy we can print off for clients of their insurance? Any letter or something if a country asking for that? We have seen a number of requirements. Francine just mentioned previously that Thailand requires a travel insurance. We also have seen other countries not only requiring, but requiring specific limits of the travel insurance. We are monitoring this situation, and Katja, you probably will want to share on our collaboration with international organization. Recently, Generali Global Assistance has also joined and supported some of the digital pass and smart vaccination initiatives, which offer our travelers tools where they can quickly check rapidly changing requirements of a particular country and also download necessary documents to ease their travel. We continue to sponsor and enable this organization. So Good Health Pass is one of them. CAPSCA ICAO organization is another one, WHO. So in addition to our policies, there are several tools which are available through our networks to help travelers their travel. Katja, any comments?
Yeah, I would just add, that we also have, with some of our clients, implemented, a solution where if you have, a policy, with, Europe Assistance, you have access, to information on our website, around travel restrictions, vaccinations required, and requirements, to enter the country, et cetera, that you can search. So we're certainly here to enable the travelers, in this difficult time.
Thank you. And then final question to round us also, which came previously from Lillian. How will the recent changes in our industry affect how we do business in the future of travel? So it's a very broad question, and I will let our panelists to see the world is definitely changing every day, and that's why we're doing quite frequent research and survey. Example, this survey, which was performed in May, already things are changing rapidly. So what are our opinions, Francine? Let's start with you.
Yes, so as you said, the situation is evolving and changing rapidly. So I've had to consult my crystal ball many times over the last months, and it's come up with different answers. But no, to be a bit more serious, we as you say, do surveys and monitor the situation very closely. And we have been asking ourselves this question: what will structurally change in the world of travel? And will people want to travel again the same way going forward? And in leisure travel, so travel for holidays, we have seen strong evidence that people will want to come back to the level of travels they were doing before. People want to travel for all the reasons that we've talked about. Now, currently, the way of traveling and the destinations are different than before. And there are a few things that are evolving, such as the discovery of new destination and more usage of vacation rental. And there are some types of travel that will probably take longer to resume. Cruise might take a bit longer to resume, but it will get back to previous level. Where we probably will see a much longer term structural change or longer time to resume is business travel, because organizations have discovered that they can actually work remotely, that they can do without a number of the business travels that they were doing before, that some of the meetings they can hold virtually. Now, not all the meetings can be held virtually, and there's not the same level of connection by doing virtual meetings, but organizations have realized that they can be efficient and travel less. And so we expect that corporate travel will take much longer to get back to the 2019 levels.
Thank you, Francine. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take it over to the travel insurance side. I mean, we talked briefly about, you know, how we think the travel insurance is going to be more tailored, or an acceleration toward a more tailored product. But I think that what the industry has learned is that education is key. There are a lot of things changing. There are certain requirements, certain countries requiring travel insurance. And I think what we learned during COVID is that sometimes there's confusion about, you know, what's covered, what's not covered. And, you know, our goal is to make people comfortable traveling for peace of mind. And I think together with our partners, we want to make sure that our, you know, our mutual end customers have the right information, have the right transparency, understand what's covered, understand what's not covered. And I think that that will give people a state of mind. I mean, we always try to be as transparent as possible about what is covered, what's not covered, but I think there'll be continued emphasis on behalf of the industry for education and people learning about ways they can be more comfortable. So I think we can be together more of a resource for our mutual customers to get them more comfortable traveling, whether it be by purchasing travel insurance, understanding the restrictions, understanding, you know, what they're going to face when they go to a certain country. So I think we have to keep the end customer in mind and really educate them to make sure that they're getting the right product and also, you know, feeling comfortable to travel again, so we can all go back to traveling more and traveling safely and being more comfortable while traveling, I would say.
Appreciate that, and we are on time. So there are several other questions which came through right now. One of them touches on emergency medical travel assistance, which we provide, and there will be a follow-up study which we'll publish in the coming weeks. So well, we will ask you to join us next month to talk about that, as well as there was a question about US CARES Act, and I would add the No Surprises Act, which are changing the landscape of the healthcare in United States. Those are topics which we will cover in our further surveys and webinar and publishment. So appreciate everyone joining. Thank you for spending 45 minutes with us. As mentioned, this is a recorded webinar. You will receive a copy of the recording, and we will welcome you to reach out to your points of contacts at Europe Assistance and January Global Assistance for any further inquiries. And would like to thank Francine, Chris, and Katya for their insights.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy traveling.